Can you hide my glasses, man? Hide them quickly, they'll see you! Oh shit! When you think of crazy or dumb dictators, the most common candidates for this title is either Mr. Hilt, Saddam Hussein, or Stalin. However, all of these dictators still got a lot of things done and arguably lifted the economy up for most, and I mean most, people in their countries. Despite this, these leaders got a lot of their own people killed. However, Pol Pot is on a whole different level. The man managed to kill nearly 25% of Cambodia's entire population in less than 4 years in an attempt to establish a communist utopia, which even resulted in another fellow socialist nation to invade his country because he was taking things too far. On May 19, 1925, Pol Pot, or Sal of Sar as he was known at the time, was born. His early life was marked by traditional Khmer culture, but as Cambodia was drawn into the French colonial sphere in the late 19th century, the influences of Western political thought began to permeate in the 20th century. Sal of Sar, or Pol Pot, actually had a quite nice childhood despite being under Western rule. His father Lof was a prosperous farmer who owned 9 hectares of rice land and several draft cattle. Meanwhile, Pol Pot's mother was a devout Buddhist and well-respected woman. Pol Pot's family also had connections with the Cambodian royal family. His cousin Meek was a consort of King Sizawaf Monviong, who allowed Pol Pot to visit regularly. In 1949, after World War II, access to further education abroad made Sar part of the tiny elite in Cambodia. He and 21 other selected students sailed from Saigon aboard a ship, stopping at Singapore, Colombo, and Djibouti en route to Marseille. From 1949 to 1953 in France, Pol Pot was exposed to Marxist and communist ideologies. Why does all the weird shit start in France? During his time in France, the political situation in Cambodia had also changed. King Monviong had died, with Norodom Sihanouk replacing him, mainly through French influence. In 1953, Pol Pot returned to a country that had been experiencing an independence war from France for several years, known as the First Indochina War. As a believer of Marxism, Pol Pot believed that the Khmer Viet Minh was the most promising resistance group for him to join. Although the war with France was over by November, the communist forces still fought against the Cambodian king until 1954. After signing a truce with the king, Cambodia's communists decided to pursue power through peaceful means rather than violence by participating in the 1955 elections. They did horribly, and Pol Pot became a history, French, and geography teacher for a while. His students actually describe him as a good teacher, which is rather surprising for what was about to come in a few years. In 1959 at a conference, the communist movement's leadership established the Kampuchean Labour Party based on Marxist-Leninist model of democratic centralism. The Cambodian king, obviously not happy with a bunch of communists calling for his overthrow, began cracking down hard on anyone suspected of supporting the movement. However, this crackdown only emboldened the communists and they began to gain more supporters. But they still had to remain in hiding, and Pol Pot stayed in the jungle where he would wait for more support. In 1965, Pol Pot flew from Vietnam to China, where his official host was Deng Xiaoping. During his visit, Chinese officials trained Pot on topics like dictatorship of the proletariat, class struggles, and political purges. Pol Pot also witnessed the Chinese Cultural Revolution firsthand, which would greatly influence his political view. After 8 years of gathering international support, material, and followers, the revolutionary army, known as the Khmer Rouge, would finally be complete in 1967. In January 1968, the Khmer Rouge launched their insurgency with an attack on an army base where they seized lots of weapons. The government responded with scorched earth tactics and heavy bombings, which fueled support for the insurgents. Soon over 100,000 villagers joined them. Though Pol Pot would abandon the revolution for a while in 1970, when he flew to China after his wife began showing signs of schizophrenia. Imagine plotting your country's biggest coup in 20 years only to abandon it for your wife. What a family man he was. However, an even bigger plot twist was about to come. In 1970, King Sihanouk was overthrown in a coup led by General Lon Nol, who established a pro-American government. The Cambodian king also flew to China to meet with Pol Pot, where the Chinese government forced them to be friends against the pro-Americans. The coup was not necessarily a bad thing though. It provided Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge with an opportunity to increase their influence, positioning themselves as the primary opposition to the Lon Nol regime. The Khmer Rouge's military strategies proved effective. By 1975, they entered Phnom Penh, the capital of Cambodia, amidst the chaos of the civil war. It had taken Pol Pot 22 years to finally take control of Cambodia, and he viewed the population of the capital with direct mistrust, particularly as the city's numbers had swelled by peasant refugees who had fled the Khmer Rouge advance and were considered to be traitors. After taking the capital, the Khmer Rouge ordered an evacuation, falsely claiming it was to avoid a US bombing. Over 2.5 million people were forced out, including 15 to 20,000 patients from hospitals, with little preparation. The evacuation aimed to dismantle capitalism, Sihanouk's support base, and suspected CIA networks, allowing the Khmer Rouge to consolidate power and push urban populations into agriculture. On April the 20th, 1975, Pol Pot entered the capital secretly, taking up residence in the railway station with other Khmer Rouge leaders before moving to the finance ministry. After his victory, Pol Pot visited North Korea and China, where Mao advised him to avoid extreme measures, cautioning him against blindly imitating China's socialist model. Pol Pot also met with Kim Il-sung in North Korea before returning to Cambodia in July. You know things are about to go pretty bad when even Mao and Kim Il-sung are warning you to not do anything extreme. The Khmer Rouge established a nominal parliamentary system with the former king as head of state, hoping to leverage his status internationally. However, the Khmer Rouge controlled the real power. The Khmer Rouge would ban the use of money to prevent corruption, effectively making Cambodia a slave state. All citizens were expected to work without pay, with severe punishment for disobedience. What a mad lad, need to pay 500 Cambodian dollars for a ticket out of the country? Too bad, monetary transactions do not exist anymore. The Khmer Rouge also began executing people they labeled as bad elements, often using their remains as fertilizer. Pol Pot would take the repressions that he learned from China even further. Everyday language was modified to promote socialist collectivism. Cambodians were encouraged to use we instead of I, while working people were often segregated by sex. Sports were banned, and the only permitted reading material was government issued, like Pas de Vat, which was the revolution newspaper. In 1976, the king resigned, allowing Pol Pot to shift fully to socialist policies. He portrayed the country as a revolutionary model, becoming prime minister under the pseudonym Pol Pot. Of course, privileges were reserved for Khmer Rouge members, while religious and ethnic groups faced persecution. Despite their Marxist pretenses, the Khmer Rouge sought to eradicate the working class, seeing it as a relic of the past. In their new utopia, the working class did not exist anymore. As famine and violence spread, internal purges grew severe, with Pol Pot eliminating perceived traitors. But don't worry, Pol Pot had a solution for the famines. Communal kitchens were established so all members of a commune ate together, with foraging and hunting banned as individualistic. Children over 7 were also forced to live communally with Khmer Rouge instructors instead of their parents. Buddhist monks were labeled social parasites and forced into manual labor.
Vaterlandsverräter! Scheiße. Proviant requirieren.
Even those who were stereotypically thought as having intellectual qualities, such as wearing glasses or speaking multiple languages, were executed out of fear that they would rebel against the Khmer Rouge. The attempt to purify Cambodian society along racial, social and political lines also led to the purges of Cambodia's previous military, along with business leaders, journalists, students, doctors and lawyers. The Khmer Rouge pretty much began killing anyone who was considered smart in an attempt to create a new pure utopia. According to many academic sources, the most widely accepted estimates of excess deaths under the Khmer Rouge say that 33% of Cambodian men died under the Khmer Rouge compared to 16% of Cambodian women. Pol Pot's strong belief that Cambodia needed to be transformed into an agrarian utopia stemmed from his experience in Cambodia's rural northeast. Pol Pot said that the killings were meant for the purification of the populace. During this time, Pol Pot saw the Khmer Rouge as an example that should be copied by other revolutionary movements across the world, and courted Marxist leaders from Burma, Indonesia, Malaysia and Thailand, allowing Thai Marxists to establish bases along the Cambodian border with Thailand. In reality, Whilst in a state of utopic frenzy, the Khmer Rouge aimed outwards with the goal of recreating the new Angkorian Empire. The biggest foreign in Pol Pot's project, however, was Vietnam, who had been opposing him ever since his group took power and had declared independence from the Vietnamese communist movements. After several border clashes between 1975 and 1978, Vietnam had enough. On the 21st of December 1978, the Vietnamese army launched its full-scale invasion. In only 2 weeks, the Vietnamese army had entered the Cambodian capital and established a pro-Vietnamese Cambodian state, known as the People's Republic of Kampuchea. In February, after 2 months, the Chinese attacked northern Vietnam, hoping to draw Vietnamese troops away from the invasion of Cambodia. This did little to stop the advancing Vietnamese forces, and Pol Pot escaped to Thailand. During the 1979 monsoon season, the Khmer Rouge forces began returning to Cambodia, and by mid-1980, they claimed 40,000 troops, aided by Chinese supplies. However, in 4 years, the Khmer Rouge was pushed back to Thailand again in 1984, and Pol Pot was diagnosed with Hodgkin's disease, another form of cancer, which led him to retire from military command in 1985. Having previously executed most of the best doctors in Cambodia, Pol Pot had to take a long journey to China for treatment, which would worsen his condition. Beaten, ill, and out of hope, Pol Pot returned to Cambodia in 1988, wary of early peace talks. With the end of the Cold War, the US stopped recognizing the Khmer Rouge as Cambodia's legitimate government, and in 1991, Cambodian factions agreed to a UN-supervised ceasefire, paving the way for democratic elections. After suffering badly in the 1993 elections, Pol Pot continued the armed struggle in the jungle. However, facing military losses and mass desertions, Pol Pot moved his headquarters multiple times, retreating further as support dwindled. His health deteriorated due to aortic stenosis, and a stroke left him partially paralyzed. As the Khmer Rouge forces dwindled, he spent more time with his family, expressing to his aides that the movement's end was near. In 1997, Pol Pot was finally arrested by one of his commanders who believed that Pot was planning to kill him. Pol Pot was sentenced to life in prison, however, he remained in house arrest for the time. During his house arrest, he was visited by American journalist Nate Thayer. In an interview, Pol Pot stated that his conscience was clear, but acknowledged that mistakes were made. He also told Thayer, "I want you to know that everything I did was for my country." On the 15th of April, 1998, Pol Pot died in his sleep of a heart attack. However, Thayer suggested that he took his own life upon learning of plans to hand him over to the United States. His body was preserved for verification before his wife cremated it. The Khmer Rouge continued to lose territory, and by March 1999, the same Khmer Rouge commander who had arrested and handed Pol Pot over was also captured, marking the group's effective collapse. It has now been over 25 years since the Khmer Rouge was disbanded, which is not that long if you ask me. I mean, there are even videos of Pol Pot's body on YouTube, which you could search up if you're into those kind of things. Pol Pot imagined a Cambodian Marxist utopia based on his experience from the self-sufficient villages in the jungle. But the same king that Pot ousted in the 70s, Norodom Sihanouk, returned to power in 1993 and re-established the monarchy, showing how truly dumb and incompetent Pol Pot and his movement was at establishing a utopia for the working class, all while killing nearly 25% of the entire population in less than 4 years.
ឥឡូវក៏ដោយលោកធ្វើជាមនុស្សកាចសាហាវខុសខើឬក៏យ៉ាងម៉េច